Good evening, everybody, and welcome back to another Figma tutorial. Today we'll be doing a simple icon design, and the inspiration for this one came from a recent trip to the Nelson Atkins Museum of Art, where they have an installation of 18 feet tall or 18-foot tall badminton shuttlecocks. So very interesting bits of modern art. And you can see two of them here on the lawn outside the museum, which is this very stately looking building. And the one in particular that I want to base this icon off of is this one right here. It's standing on its base, and this is called the cork, and it's completely vertical, and I think that's going to make for ease of design, and I like the way it looks, because when it's one color, it might be less clear about what it is when it's on its side like this. So I like this one here on the left. I do need a little bit of a better picture to go off of prior to starting the design, and so I'll go over here to Google image search, and I did a search for Nelson Atkins Museum Shuttlecock. I found this picture, which is just perfect. It's a very straight-on photo. It's very symmetric with regard to the feathers. So we're going to go ahead and go with this. I will right-click, copy the image, and we will paste that into the frame I have set up in Figma. I will select the frame, press Command-V, and I can tell the image is a bit too large for what I intend to do, so I'm going to shrink this down a little bit. I'm holding Option and Shift to constrain the proportions there. So I'm going to move that a little bit to the left, and just to make sure that I don't actually accidentally click on it or move it around or anything like that while I'm designing the components of the icon, I will go ahead and lock it. And while I'm here in the Layers panel, I'll double click on the layer name, and instead of image 1, we're just going to call that pretty. And so we are good to begin the design. And as far as the design process is concerned, since this is meant to be a simple icon, I'm not after a photorealistic look to what I'm about to create. So looking at this, I want to distill the essence of the birdie. I want to choose only the design elements that really give it the essence of what it is. And so what stands out to me is the cork here at the bottom, this orange bit, as well as the feather. Now I'm only going to concentrate on this portion of the feather, which is called the vane, and this is the quill. But I'm going to only focus on the vane, and this, I'm not going to focus on this band right here. I don't think it will do much for us when we're done with the icon, so I'm just going to sort of ignore that. And so to begin, I'm going to hold down the Z key, which, as you can tell, changes my regular move cursor to a zoom icon, and if I hold down Z, click and drag, I'll draw a selection of the area I want to zoom in on. So I'll click, and this is what we're going to start with, which is the cork. And looking at it, I can tell that it's basically made of two geometric shapes. So we have a circle or an ellipse at the bottom here, which makes up about half of it. It's the semicircular portion. And then on top of that, we have a rectangle, which is good for us because those are two shapes that are easily created in Figma. And of course we could use a keyboard shortcut for the rectangle or the ellipse, but for the sake of this stream, I'll go ahead and click the Shape Tools drop-down arrow. We'll start with the ellipse, and of course if you click and drag, you can create an ellipse, a circle or an oval. And of course, if you hold down Shift, you'll maintain that one-to-one constraint ratio. So I'm going to continue with that. And let's see here, this is 74 by 74. So we're getting there, but it needs to be a little bit larger. And so what is this? This is 88 by 88. And I think we can go just a little bit larger, so we'll go up to 90 by 90. And so that's looking pretty good. And interestingly, the entirety of the ellipse is almost as tall as the cork itself, and in reality that might actually be the case, but with using the photo that I chose, the actual cork is just a few pixels taller than the 90 that we have here for the ellipse. So the next step would be to introduce a rectangle to fill out the rest of the shape. And I know that the width I'm looking for is 90, and so I will come up here to the drop down, I'll select rectangle, and I will click and drag until I have one that has a width of 90. This says 90 by 30. And so what I want is to make sure that this rectangle is aligned in the vertical axis with the ellipse that's below it. And so when that, I have guides turned on, so when that red line you see there appears, I know that I am lined up along the y-axis. So I'll go ahead and hold shift while I drag, and I want it to be right there. And so that guide tells me that the bottom of the rectangle is lined up with the very middle of the ellipse, so that's perfect. And I wasn't right, of course, about 30 being the height that we were looking for. And so I'm going to click and drag to about right there. That's looking pretty good. And so this is the basic shape of the cork that I'm looking for. And let's see here, I'm going to select both of these layers, and I'm going to group them together for now. So I'll right click and we'll go to group selection, which has a keyboard command of Command G. So we'll click that. This group is called group 1, so we're going to rename that cork, and I'll zoom out a bit. I'm just going to drag the, there we go. I'm going to drag this layer, this group over here just to sort of get it out of the way while I construct the vein, or the feather portion. And so I'm going to zoom in again, so hold down Z, click and drag. And let's see here, I really want to just focus on the general, the look. I want to capture what this looks like in its essence. And so I'm not going to worry about the quill portion, and like I said, I'm not going to worry about the band. I'm just going to worry about sort of the shape of the vein, and I think I might even, I'll extend it down into the cork, and you'll see what I mean in a moment. And so I want to start with a sort of a diamond shape, or a rectangle that's been rotated 45 degrees. And so I could, of course, start with a rectangle by selecting one here from the shapes drop down, but I believe I'm going to use the polygon, which is sort of an easier, it's another way of going about doing it. You'll get the same effect with a rotated rectangle, but we're going to choose the polygon. And when we click to place a polygon layer, we have a trigon, we have a triangle, or a threegon. And this handle right here, you'll see when I mouse over, it says count 3. Well, if you click and hold and move the mouse up, you begin to add sides to the polygon. And so, we started with a 3-gon, here's a 4-gon, 5-gon, 6-gon, so on and so forth, and you can get something that's, almost circular. But what we're looking for is a 4-gon, 4-sided polygon. And so this is the diamond shape that I'm looking for. And so, yeah, that's perfect. And I'm going to click and drag to move it over the middle feather here. And I want to line the top of the bounding box up with the top of the feather, just so I know where my starting point at the top is. And let's see here, I do want this to be a little bit wider, because it looks like the edge of the feathers, about right here and about right here. And I'm not going to make any effort to make this photorealistic. It's going to be symmetric, because as you can see here, this has some, let's see, in the photo there's some concavity here, and this is convex, but I'm just going to keep the angles more or less as they are. And so I do want to make that just a little bit wider, something like that. Yeah, I like that. And I do want to make this taller. The issue is if I select the bottom of the bounding box, click and drag, while it does make it taller, it also increases the length of these sides right here, which is not what I'm looking for. And so I'm going to enter, what we need to do is enter the edit object mode. And there are a couple of ways, a few ways of doing that. One of the ways is up here, this trio of icons. The leftmost one is the Edit Object button, and we can click that to go into the Edit Object mode. We can also double click, or we can press Enter. And you'll know you're in the Edit Object mode when the three icons up here disappear and are instead replaced by these actions over here, and there's a button that says Done. And also when you mouse over the object that you are, the shape of the object that you're editing, there is a pinstripe effect going on. And so I'm going to grab this handle down here, and clicking and dragging this doesn't affect the length or the angle of the sides above it, just the two that are connected to this handle here, which is exactly what I'm looking for, because I'm looking to just sort of keep these sides as they are, because I'm going to go forward using those. And so I'm going to, there we go, click that again, hold shift while I move this down, and I'm going to have it go past just the top of this cork here, because as you can see, the quill goes into the cork. And so that's looking pretty good. I like that. And that's about the shape that I want. I might want to bring this up just a little bit, maybe something like that. And we can exit the edit object mode by pressing Enter or Return on a Mac keyboard, or clicking Done. So I'll go ahead and click that now. And yeah, that is it for the design of the middle feather. I'm liking how that's looking. So I'm going to zoom out just a bit. I'm going to move this feather over here, and let's see here. I'm going to rename this layer. We're going to call that middle feather. And right now, what we need to do is sort of fill this out a bit. So we have one feather in the middle, but looking at the image here, there are, from the left, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 feathers in total. And I think 5 feathers might be too much for too many elements for this simple icon that I mean to create. So I'm only going to go with 3. And so there's going to be, this is the middle feather. I will create one for the right side and one for the left side. And in order to do that, I'm going to select the middle feather layer, and I'm going to duplicate it by holding down Command and pressing D. And at the bottom here it says duplicate selection, which is indeed that is what I did, and I can tell that that is the case because if I click and drag, the original is below it. And this one, I'm going to move everything over just a little bit. There we go. This is going to be the right feather, and so to avoid any confusion, I'm going to call this right feather. I'm going to rename it here in the layers panel. And what I need to do is I'm going to rotate this. So it's sort of this side here, I want to have the same angle as this quill of the feather on the right hand side. So to get that as close as possible, I'm going to click and drag what is going to be the right feather over here. And I'm going to, there's multiple ways of rotating. You can scrub in a value by clicking and holding here on the rotation input field. You could type in a value here, or you could, once you have this bended double-headed arrow, you could click and hold and rotate it that way. And I'm looking for something that's like that. Yeah, that's about right. And I can see here that the angle of the rotation that I ended up with is minus 14.99 degrees, and I only want to deal with whole numbers, so I'm going to get rid of that and just put in minus 15. And so this is looking good. I like the angle that is rotated at. However, one thing that I'm seeing is all this time we were still dealing with the bounding box of the original polygon that we began with. And so when we rotated this layer, the bounding box, of course, rotated too, which is why it has this angle on it. It's going down here. It's not completely vertical, horizontal on the top, bottom, left, right. And that's going to make alignment difficult in a little bit, because when I gather these, or when I select these layers on my feathers together, if I don't fix this now and I try to use this button here and align everything at the bottom, while we know that the bottom that we mean to align is the very bottom of the vein or the feather right here, what it's going to align to is the bottom point of the bounding box, which will be this handle. And so what we need to do is to flatten this, which will reset the bounding box, among other things. And flatten is when you're selecting more than one layer, especially if the layers are on top of each other, it's a destructive action. So that means that it's not going to group them together. You can take each individual layer out of the group if you wanted to. It's going to flatten all the layers into one. But since this is just a single layer that we're working with, that's not really a concern. And there's a few ways to flatten. One way to do that would be to select your layer, right-click, and go to Flatten, or we can select Command E. And a third way that we can't do right now because we don't have more than one layer selected, but if we did, would be to come up here to the Boolean operations drop-down menu and select Flatten Selection, but since that is not applicable right now because I'm sort of doing it off here to the side. So I'm going to hold down Command and press E, and when I do, you'll notice that the bounding box changes. There we go. So that's what we're working with now. However, because the area of the bounding box was recalculated, we notice here down at the bottom that we have some, we have a width and a height that are no longer whole numbers. And so what I'm going to do is basically, stay very close to the number it gave us. So we have 146.58. I'll just call that 146. I won't round up. And we have 370.92. 370 is fine. There we go. And so now our bounding box is a little bit more manageable. And so when I try to, for example, align these two together on the bottom, and I click this, both of their bottom points are aligned on the x-axis. And so that works for the feather on the right, but now I need to consider the left feather. And so there are a couple of ways of going about doing this. One way to do that would be to duplicate it, sort of move it over here, and we could select the layer and rotate it like this, and we have to do a little bit of mental math to figure out what this figure is supposed to be, but there is an easier way to do that. And so Figma does not have a mirror function, but there is sort of a way we can get around that. If you select the layer, the right feather layer, and duplicate it, we can, let's see here, hold down Shift and press H to rotate or to mirror it sort of along the horizontal axis. And Shift H is for horizontal, and you can also do Shift V to flip it on the vertical axis. But all I want is the horizontal, so we'll do Shift H. And let's see here, these numbers are looking good. We have whole numbers here. Yeah, everything's looking just fine. So I want to go ahead and align these on the bottom. This is good. Let's see, I'm just going to make it a little bit messy, and there we go. Okay, looking really good. And now Figma wants us to use, or it's not wanting, it's prompting us to use its tidy up and auto layout feature. And so I selected all of these layers, which are they're close together and they're fairly well lined up. And so I'm going to click this button down here. This is the tidy up function, and it does that, which is not terribly useful. So we're going to undo, because it's not always the smartest thing ever. But when I align them a bit myself, we'll notice that when I mouse over, we have these handles and these controls now. And this is some of the auto layout feature that, this is a sort of a taste of the auto layout feature that Figma offers. And this vertical pink line we have right here, you can see there's one here and there's one here. And it says 0. That is the space between items, and that's also what this is right here. And so if we select this, it's going to change the so the space between the items affects the space between all items equally. So if I click this and drag in and out, you can see it affects on both sides. And that's very helpful in this situation, because it would be sort of a time waster to try to line each feather left and the right up correctly, when we could just use this function to have it do it automatically. And you can see as I move back and forth, the figure in the pink box, we're not minus 37, minus 26. That's also the same figure up here. And so if you didn't want to scrub a value in, you could just put, whatever that may be. If you know exactly what it is, you can use your arrows, your shift arrows to go by units of 10. But I think space between objects minus 50 looks pretty good, and everything is lined up as it ought to be. And let's see, I'm gonna go ahead and get rid of this picture of the birdie, because we'll no longer be needing that. And so let's move this to the middle, get the cork somewhere near the action. And so this is looking pretty good so far. Everything is coming along. The issue is, as you can tell when I mouse over each one of these layers, there is overlap. As you can see here, this middle feather, which is sort of, I guess, on top when you look at it this way, although it is at the bottom of the layers hierarchy, all of these overlap. And that's even more visible if you go into the outline mode, which is Shift-O. And as we can see here, there's some intersection here and again here. And so that's not going to work for us. What we need is sort of a outline shape that gets rid of this intersection area, because this, as it stands, while in this mode it looks good, looking at it here, we see that we do have some overlap. So what we're going to do is we're going to select these 3 layers here. That's the feather layers. And we're going to use a Boolean function, which I spoke of earlier. It's in this Boolean groups dropdown. And so if you click the downward arrow, it expands the selection here. And these are Boolean operations. We have union, subtract, intersect, exclude, and then flatten is right here. But we're going to select union selection. And when I click this, pay attention to the layers panel on the left, because as it stands, we have we have 3 layers selected, right feather. I should have renamed that. There we go. That's actually left feather. So we have these 3 layers selected, and when I perform a union selection, it's going to put them in a group like that. And it's going to name it union, and it names it after whichever Boolean operation you chose. So if I chose subtract selection, it would just call it subtract. And it is the Boolean operations are non-destructive in that it places everything in a group, and you can, if you want, still move your layers around. And so if you decided that that's not what if you misclicked or you decided that that's not the way to go for your design, you can just select all of these layers and drag them out, and these are now no longer in a group, and you just have this union selection right here. And so we're going to take these back into the union. Oop, that's not what I meant. There we go. And so these are all in the union group. And let's see here. If I go back into the outline view, we can see that we still have a little bit of, as far as the geometry and the math is concerned, we still have a little bit of intersection here, and that will not do. So what we're going to do at this point is to flatten this layer group. And what flatten does is it takes all the layers and it flattens them into one layer. And let me show you what happens in the outline mode. And outline mode can be a bit scary if you get into it accidentally. I've seen a few posts about people who accidentally turn outline mode on and then don't know what they did or how to get out of it. But that is, hold down Shift O, and that is your outline mode. And to flatten this selection of layers, let's see, I'm going to select the parent object, which is the, let's just call that feathers, okay? And to flatten, we can, while we have multiple layers selected, we can click this drop-down box for the Boolean operations. Flatten is at the bottom. We can also right-click. Flatten is in the middle of this list, and it's Command E. So we will select flatten, and see what happened there. I will undo that so we can compare and contrast. So this is pre-flatten, and that is after flatten. And you'll see that all of this geometry, all this math on the inside, because it was not visible and it was inside the other geometries, it was sort of not subsumed, but when it was flattened, because it saw that there was already layer information there, it just added it all together, so to speak. And so this is looking pretty good. This down here, our cork, we need to do the same operation on that. And so while they're both the same color, it looks like they're good to go. But when you're in the outline mode, you can tell that we have two layers, two shapes here, which is in the cork parent, the cork group, so of rectangle and the ellipse. And so I'm going to select both of these, which you can of course click and drag and select both layers, or you can click the cork group and clicking the parent selects all the children. And so I'm going to keep this in outline mode, and I'm going to perform another union selection. And then I'm going to, let's see here, Command E to flatten it. And now we have a vector that doesn't have, the vector combined those two shapes together into one. And as you can see here, when I just did the Boolean operation, union, as it's called, we'll call that cork, but this was a group that still had the two layers that were editable and you can move them around. But flattening is a destructive action. It combines everything together. So I can no longer select that rectangle or select that ellipse and move it around or make any changes to it, like well, I basically just can't move them around or reposition them, because this is one vector now. This is one layer, which is what I wanted and indeed was necessary for the remainder of this design tutorial, because we want to make sure that this is deliverable. This needs to be ready for handoff. We need something to give to the developer team, whether that be the people who are working on the code for the app and the back end, or some people working on the website, whatever that team looks like. They need a single file that they can deal with. And so if we drag this cork up here, everything is aligned properly. Let's make sure. Yeah, everything is aligned to center. And this is looking pretty good. I'm liking the way this looks. I don't think I'm going to do any more additional changes to this. One thing that we could do is, of course, we could select both, and we could add a corner radius, excuse me, depending on how you like. But I think I'm just going to leave everything kind of sharp because that can be done later anyway. And so we're going to, as we can see here, again in the outline mode, we have overlapping geometry. There's layer overlap here, and what we want to do is just combine this all into one path. We want to make an outline selection. And so what we do is select feathers and cork. We'll select this together. I'll go out of outline mode, and because we can see here where the overlap is, what we'll want to do here is to flatten it, which creates one layer out of it. And we can still see that there is some, it does recognize that there's overlap. And so the last step would be right click, outline stroke, and let's see here. Oh gracious, I thought that would work. Let's see here. You know what I forgot to do is, what I should have done first is make a union out of this. And so that was a non-destructive action because here are the two pieces, or the two layers that we started with inside a group called union, and we're going to just call that birdie. And then the last thing I want to do is Command E, flatten it into one layer. There were two, now there's one. Lastly, we'll right click and go to outline stroke. And now if we go to outline view, we can see that there's no more overlapping geometry. Everything is combined together in one layer. And this is our icon. We are essentially done. And we could, whatever our product specification is, if we need to export this at a specific color or whatever the case may be, now we could change that. Of course, you could have design decisions that would call for a like a two-tone color pattern, or full color, or whatever the case may be. But for the sake of this tutorial, we're just going to make this a single color, and I rather like that color, so we're going to sort of make sure that that's centered in our design. And the last thing we would do for handoff, to make sure that we have the file type that the developer would want, is we would select this layer, which I now just go, that's not what I wanted. I would select birdie, which is the layer, everything's flat and it's outlined as it should be. We'll go to export, and the default, at least on my computer, is PNG, which is PNG is it's a roster or raster graphic, so it's bitmap, and that would look fine at this dimension as long as you keep it this size. And if you shrink it down, it'll look fine. But if you need to make it larger, it's going to start looking pretty crummy. You'll start getting some artifacts. You'll start getting some alias. And so anytime you're dealing with icons, you'll want to be dealing only in vectors. That's the only way to go. And so if we click the drop-down arrow here, we have PNG, JPEG, SVG, and PDF. So PDF would preserve it as a vector, I believe. However, PDF is not an appropriate file for what we would be using this for. And so SVG is what we want. SVG is scalable vector graphic. And it has all the, so at this point, this is a vector, and this is all math, is all this is. The fill, the way it looks like there's pixels here is provided by the fill. But if you were to look at this, look at the file, open up it as a file, it's just a bunch of coordinates, and you can actually in HTML and CSS you can draw SVGs. You can draw using sort of the similar coordinate based math, and so there's also a tremendous file size happening, tremendous difference in file size between a raster graphic and a vector graphic. Vector graphic is all math, so it's a pretty small file size compared to any other type, which are raster types. So not EPS, but we'll select SVG. We want to export birdie. because that is the name of the layer. And we can see here that it's giving it the title birdie.svg, birdie.scale vector graphic. So I like that. It's saving it in one of my image directories. So we'll go ahead, and that looks good. Go ahead and save. I do want to replace it. And let's go over to our Finder. Not that. We're going to find the image that we just exported, see what it looks like. And so I found it here in Finder. If we open it up, yours may open up in a different application. Mine opens up in my browser. And we can see the document path here is indeed birdie.svg. And if we were to zoom in on this, it doesn't lose any definition. You could scale this to 1,000,000,000%, and it's always going to be very crisp because, again, these are all coordinates. This is all math. And so, if we were to zoom in this much on a roster graphic or a raster graphic, we would probably start noticing, where pixels begin and end, and possibly some artifacting if we saved it if we tried with some file size saving measures in place. But this is exactly what you're looking for, and this is exactly what you're looking for. And let's see here, if we take a look at the information, this file is 4 kilobytes, which is very, very tiny compared to what it could be if it was a raster graphic. And that is that is the deliverable that your dev team would want. And so you would hand that off to them, and then they would add that to the icon pack or to the website or what have you. And so that is the end of this tutorial, the simple icon design in Figma. Of course, if you have any questions, any concerns, I'm on the Springboard Slack. I can be reached there. You can also message me on Twitch. And of course, if you want to follow me on Twitch, you'll get notifications whenever I do any more live streams. So thank you very much for your time this evening, and I will catch you next tutorial.